This fall, I had the distinct privilege of traveling through 26 of these United States. I camped on the beaches of the Gulf of Mexico and in the redwood forests of California. I biked the streets of Seattle and the back roads of Death Valley. I walked the Edmund Pettus Bridge, excuse me, and deep into the trails into the Arizona desert. I had traveled much of this country back in 1976 when I was just out of college. With my retirement, I wanted to see how the country had progressed in the last 40 plus years. When I camped on the beach on the Gulf, it was a beautiful sight, full of the sound of birds and the laughing oceans, as long as I did not look to the east at miles of Conoco oil refineries belching fire and black smoke, downwind of which lived thousands of poor Cajuns. In Mendocino, which was a funky New Age haven in 1976, only the rich are welcome now with their $7 bottles of water, multi-million-dollar houses, and not a single face of color. As Woody Guthrie said, if you ain't got the do-re-mi boys, better go back to beautiful Texas. I spent Christmas week in New Orleans. Because of COVID, I attended a distance queer potluck yard party in the lower 9th Ward to celebrate the holiday. Neighbors of all hues and ages stopped to say hello, share cookies, sit on the porch swing, and wish us well. No one blinked an eye at our garish assembly. What a beautiful day. Excuse me. The greeting was quite different when I headed east into Mississippi. At the Mississippi line, all brown-skinned people disappeared from the highway billboards. At the Interstate Welcome Center, the first thing that greets you is a Confederate War memorial. Who are they welcoming to Mississippi? What I clearly saw is that the myth of American exceptionalism is just that, a myth. We are blessed with the huge gift of incredible land in this country. But other than that, we are people no different than any others in the world, capable of nothing more, nothing less. It's up to us to decide what our legacy will be. Are we to be remembered for despoiling our earth and remain mired in a perpetual caste system? Or are we building a multi-ethnic, multicultural society and caring for our generous share of this precious planet? Martin Luther King said, "The arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice." Following the civil rights trail, I realized that yes, it is a long struggle, but it wouldn't bend that way without everyday people putting their shoulders to that arc to keep it slowly moving in the direction of justice. When and why do we, as individuals, stand up to injustice like that man in the crowd? The Reverend James Reeb, a UU minister, took a stand in Selma, and it cost him his life. The teachers of Selma marched to the courthouse to demand to register to vote. Can you imagine being denied the right to vote after completing a college education because you couldn't guess the number of jelly beans in a jar? They could have lost their jobs, but instead they found their power. Despite their fears, they were not fired. There were too many of them. I'd like to look locally at some who have moved the arc of history towards justice. Can't help myself, you know, I am a local historian. Helen Hinsdale Rich was a member of this Universalist congregation when in 1862, she took up her speaking campaign, The Rights and Wrongs of Woman, the first locally organized campaign for women's suffrage. She spoke across the county, tagging along with a union recruitment campaign. Universalist publications mentioned her campaign, but none of the local press did so. She eventually moved to the friendlier turf of Chicago, but her old friend, John Stebbins Lee, the first president of St. Lawrence University, always welcomed her as a house guest when she returned to Canton. That much the papers would publish. She continued her campaign in Chicago and St. Joseph, Missouri. Her death in 1915 was noted as far away as California, celebrating her as a campaigner for women's rights, but it was not mentioned in any North Country papers. As Laurel Thatcher Ulrich noted, well-behaved women seldom make history. When I first became town historian, several local residents whispered to me, "You know, Dr. Allen, he performed abortions." I knew of Dr. Allen from my grandmother because he was the doctor who was supposed to deliver my father, but he got there too late. The delivery was over, and as my grandmother always proudly announced, she got up and made Dr. Allen's breakfast. I also knew that my grandparents consulted with Dr. Allen when they got married in 1906 and postponed having children until their mortgage was paid. 3 boys were born to them 3 years apart. Dr. Allen was distributing contraceptives and birth control information at least 10 years before Margaret Sanger would go to prison for doing the same thing. How did Dr. Frank Allen become so committed to family planning? The story, according to his last nurse. In 1892, he was practicing medicine in Richville when his wife, Anna, began to miscarry and hemorrhage. The couple boarded a train for Ogdensburg, where they consulted with Dr. Medill at the city hospital. Dr. Medill refused to perform a D&C. They had no choice but return to their home in Richville, where Anna bled to death. Dr. Allen promised himself that he would never let something like this happen to another woman under his care. He sought training to be able to perform D&Cs. He continued to consult on family planning and performed his last D&C in his office just a few months before he died in early 1953 at the age of 92. For any who may doubt the veracity of his story, please check out the 1938 newspapers for the story of his trial for performing an abortion, which ended when the accuser dropped the charges to avoid being charged herself for seeking an abortion. William F. Anderson was a lumber dealer with yards in Potsdam and Ogdensburg. He was noted for commenting on local school board elections and other political affairs in his ads in the local newspapers. In June 1927, he published the ad you see in front of the podium in response to a KKK rally on the Norwood Road, where 500 new local members were enlisted in the organization. I will read only the closing, but you can check the whole thing out yourself after the service. It's rather humorous. Anyone who is 100% American can prove it better with a $10 bill than a KKK card or a uniform, which they charge $5 extra for. The air of mystery which prevails at one of these meetings is one which appeals to some, and they lose their sense of proportion. Look out. And when in Potsdam, buy your building supplies at W.F. Anderson, where red cedar shingles at 90 cents a bunch are being talked about. 11 bunches or a KKK card, which will you spend your money for? During the rise of the KKK locally in the 1920s, our own Reverend Harry Adams Hersey was one of the few local religious leaders to stand up to the KKK. He had moved to Canton from Indiana as a stronghold of the Klan and wrote an article based on his experiences there for the Universalist Press. The article was reprinted in the Plain Dealer and condemned the dangers from the Klan to any community. What led these people to take a stand for justice? Often at a personal and reputational risk? I know my own commitment to pushing for caste parity and justice was set in stone. One cold November evening in 1995, when I was driving my son home from daycare, he was very excited about his upcoming 3rd birthday and making plans for what his gifts would be. Abruptly, he declared to me, "When I'm 3, I won't be Black anymore." Just remembering the moment brings tears to my eyes. Out of the mouths of babes, as they say, who can deny the existence of the pervasive negative caste system in our country when, at the age of 3, my Black son realized what his skin color meant and thought somehow by 3-year-old magic, he could be transformed into a member of the dominant caste on his birthday. If only it were so easy. This country and this world are at a crossroads. There is no doubt the majestic hills and rivers we admire will survive in some form. They've been around for millennia and will be around in some form or another for many more. Will humanity and this country survive? That is an entirely different question. I see a nation divided by fear. We can only survive as a nation if we continue to grow and embrace the glorious riches of our diversity. Only by all of us lovingly putting our shoulder to the arc of history can we keep it moving towards justice for all. It is up to us to commit to overcoming our own fears and prejudices, moving out of our comfort zones. How can we move the arc of justice? Talk to your neighbor, the plumber. Show real interest in others whose lives are totally different from yours. Find out why they love four-wheeling or ice fishing or whatever it is that you would never do. Find the humanity in the woman down the street with that lawn sign that you abhor. Speak to her kindly. Find out what she likes to read and offer up what you love. Will we choose protecting our own social status or building a vibrant, multicultural, just, democratic society? The choice is ours. Only by building relationships across the divide can we bring the walls of fear down. There are two sides to every wall. Let us commit ourselves to taking down our side of the wall, stone by heavy stone.